All right, guys, so today you are going to be taking your students through the independent investigation as well as the guided practice. So as you're going through this, these are the key things that you really need to be highlighting with your students. Thing number one, when we're going through reflections, the main idea behind reflections, as we saw yesterday, is we need to make sure that we are not confusing these with translations. So as we see, translations, as you've seen before, translations mean that we are simply shifting the shape but keeping the same orientation. So for example, if I were to translate this shape here downward, we would end up with an identical shape in a congruent shape, rather, an identical shape in the same orientation. That's not what we're working on today. We're working on reflections. So the easiest way to do this is following these steps. So again, we're following these steps. Step A, or step one, is identify the ordered pair of figure S and L in this graph. We're going to identify those below. So if I go through, I'm going to identify S first. S is at -3, 5. -3, 5. So again, you're going to be watching your students do this. This is an independent investigation. You're simply going to be observing what they're doing. N, as we look, N is going to be -3, +3. And then L, we see, is at 0, 3. 0 on the x-axis, 3 on the y-axis. So we've done part A. Great. Next step, we're going to reflect this across the x-axis. And you're going to get really annoyed by hearing me say this. But every time you reflect, take some kind of a highlighter or a different colored pen or something that you can easily distinguish and label your line of reflection. In this case, the line of reflection is the x-axis. So I've highlighted that. That means that I'm going to be reflecting across the x-axis. Now, in order to reflect this, we're going to follow some very simple steps. We're going to look at S first, and let's reflect S. Well, I see that S moving across this axis, as we talked about today, or I'm recording this on Monday, as we talked about yesterday by your perspective. When we reflect this, if you look in a mirror and your reflection is a different distance from the mirror than you are, there's some weird stuff happening. Same thing here. So let's take S and find out how far it is. S is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units away from the line of reflection. So in order to do that, I go 5 units away on the other side. So I say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I have 5 units away from the line of reflection. That's S prime. Then I do the same thing for the image of N, which is going to be N prime. I say that's 1, 2, 3 away. So I go down 1, 2, 3. And I clearly label my points of N prime. And then I do the same thing for L, which I see is going to be 3 away from the line of reflection. And you'll notice, 1, 2, 3, you'll notice that each of these remained in the same x value. So it reflected across the x-axis, but that means that the y value changed. The x values remained the same. They didn't shift left or right at all. So when I connect these, I've now created the image of S and L, which is S prime, N prime, L prime. And if I label these points, I get -3, -5. I get -3, -3. And I get 0, -3. So I've reflected, I've labeled, and I've written the ordered pairs. Now, here's the key point that I want you to notice. When I translated across the x-axis, my y value remained almost the same, except the sign of the y value changed. The x values remained the exact same. So across the x-axis, the y changes. So as you're taking your students through this, let's go through these steps again, and I want you to think about that. Make a prediction. What's going to happen when I reflect across the x-axis? Well, let's try it. First, identify the ordered pairs of R, S, T. Let's go through then and do that. R, I can see, is at -4, 4. S is at 0, -2. And T is at -3, -1. So, our prediction should hopefully be made, but let's actually test it. For part B, reflect the image across the x-axis. Well, hopefully you remember the first thing that you need to do when we're reflecting is clearly identify, clearly identify the correct axis, which I obviously just messed up. There we go. So I've labeled my axis, and now I'm going to reflect it. Now let's start with R. R is 1, 2, 3, 4 points away, or 4 units away from the line of reflection. So I go 4 to the other side. And I graph and label R prime. Then for T, I see that T is 1 away. And this is where things get a little weird. I have to go to the other side of the line of reflection in order to graph T prime. Because, again, the idea is I'm reflecting the shape to be equidistant, as we talked about on Monday, equidistant from the line of reflection. So if it's 1 below, then its image, or T prime, needs to be 1 above. And then finally with S prime, it's 2 below, so it needs to be 2 above S prime. I connect all of these points. And this is the image. Now, hopefully you were able to create that prediction. Let's actually check it. We end up with R remaining 4, but then it becomes -4, -4. So as we saw earlier, the Y value remains the same, but actually changes its sign. So then we have this. S prime became 0, +2, because the sign changed, and then T, as you've hopefully gathered, is -3, +1. So the idea behind this is you're going to be taking your students through both of these. You're going to have them do the independent investigation for about 4 minutes. So you're doing this for 4 minutes. During this time, you're giving them helpful guidance. However, you're not giving them answers, and you are not showing them your sheet. Once you're done, you're going to allude, meaning suggest, this idea that when you flip across your x-axis, when you reflect across your x-axis, that your Y value changes sign. But you're not going to directly tell them. You're going to have them try to apply this same knowledge as they are pushing into the guided practice. After that, we're going to come back together. So again, 4 minutes on the investigation, about 3 minutes on the guided practice. We're going to come back together as a whole class, and we're going to do the stop and jot. From there, you'll be working with your group to do the partner practices. Now, to give you some general context, I'm going to have you actually pause the video here and look at these. See if you can figure them out on your own. Once you're done, unpause the video and give it a shot. Okay, so hopefully this was reasonably successful for you. First step that I always do is I'm going to write down my coordinates. So U became, or U initially was 1, -5. V was 3, 0. And W was 5, -3. Now, I'm reflecting across the y-axis, which means I'm going to shade or highlight my y-axis, not the x-axis in this case. In order to reflect, I count to ensure these are equidistant. So V prime is going to be, well, that didn't work, going to be right here. That's V prime. W prime is equidistant u prime is equidistant and x prime is equidistant. There we go. If I could draw better, that would be beautiful. Now, as I go in, I end up finding out, well, oh my goodness, the same rule that applied when flipping or reflecting across the x-axis also applies when I reflect across the y-axis. The only difference is instead of my y value changing sign, my x value changes sign. So you're going to carry your students through these. You're going to ensure that they establish the rule. A reflection across the x-axis means that y changes sign. The y value in your coordinate changes its sign. And to reflect across the y-axis means that your x value changes its sign.